Saturday afternoon, Saturday, May 30th, and this is my 30th time to try to record this thing. Not 30th, but it's been a whole thing. Anyways, you'll notice on your agenda when you see it, I'm speaking in the future, on your agenda there is a section where I am going to go over some updates and things of that nature as far as like forecasting. My vision for this little section is really when we meet to kind of let you guys behind the curtains, if you will, right? Let's Wizard of Oz this thing. I want to pull you back there and just let you know basically where my headspace is. And I figured more of these touch points are going to be better in the short term versus less. As we're just learning to trust each other and understand each other and that nature, I think it'd be really helpful. So nevertheless. So one of the things I wanted to put before you today, and not to exhaust it in its entirety, is this document, this Leadership in Church Size Dynamics. So if we were Mormons, which we're not, but if we were, this would be our Book of Mormon. We would have the Bible, and then we would have this Leadership Size Dynamics as the second most important document. Again, we're not Mormons. However, this is an incredibly helpful document. And it's helpful for lots of different reasons, but here's the primary one. It is a well-researched document with current modern-day church trends and different lead lag measures, certain metrics that we're looking for in 2026 versus maybe metrics we would have been looking for 100 years ago in churches. And so churches are living organisms, which means that their needs and desires change over time. And so therefore, it's very prudent to understand kind of like, okay, where are we at culturally? Where are we at in this time in history? And how do those things impact our vision for going forward into the future? How does it impact us being good stewards of the things that God has entrusted us with to take care of? And ultimately, that's what this document is going to help us with. And it helps us in a way that other church growth material doesn't. I would argue that it's lacking. A lot of other church growth material, while good, and you certainly can find gems anywhere, at the same time, a lot of it concentrates on cosmetic changes, updating certain portions of the building. Branding is another huge topic of conversation. And all of those things are very important, very, very important. However, one kind of whole slate of inquiry that goes unnoticed is taking it into account exactly what this document does, and that is taking into account each church's size dynamic. Now, depending on the organization, whether it's a very small organization or it's a big organization, the size itself of the organization is going to dictate certain thresholds. It's going to dictate certain strengths and weaknesses, and it's certainly going to dictate what must be accomplished or what must be shored up before you can cross from one size into the next size. Okay? So this document really interacts with that more so than any other document I've ever been familiar with. So from a scholarly perspective, this is a very robust document. And also I'll add to, from an experiential perspective, I have never found a document more helpful in putting necessary boundaries around what a church should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing based on their size, right? And so anyways, hopefully as we kind of peruse through this thing a little bit, it'll make a little bit more sense. But so I've already recorded so many of these videos and they've all been over 30 minutes, and I am determined to make this one a lot shorter. So let's go ahead and get into it. Here's what I want you to see. What this document is going to do is it's going to take, I think, like the four primary kind of size dynamics that are represented in various churches across America. I don't think it's global. I think it's just America, which is still helpful for us, but nevertheless. And so it's going to take each one and it's going to talk about how this culture within the size of that organization really has deep impact on whether it can change or whether it's going to have a lot of, what kind of resistance it's going to have, And again, resistance is not bad. Resistance is a healthy way of responding. But nevertheless, it's going to talk about what are some of the thresholds that you got to get through to get to the next level, or what are some of the relational dynamics that you got to make sure are firing on all cylinders before you even attempt to get to the next level, and things of that nature. Okay, so size dynamics play a huge part. Now, what I love about this document in particular is, again, like I said, is it's going to break each church down into its respective size. Okay, so I'm going to be focusing primarily on our size church, but before we get there, notice. So it starts with the house church. The house church up to 40 people is kind of the first size category. Now, this size church, a house church, obviously, just think about it logically, is going to operate a lot differently than a 1,000-member church. But there's also a sense in which even the 1,000-member church still has to maintain some of the characteristics of the house church for it to be an overall healthy church. So while you are changing and you're breaking through thresholds and you're thinking about how your particular organization functions in lieu of hopeful of growth, at the same time, we have to remember that you don't ever fully get away from all of these different dynamics, if that makes sense, okay? So let me show you what I'm talking about here a little bit. So in the small church, and I'm on page, let's see what page is this? 7. I'm on page 7. So we're going to look at page 7 and 8 primarily, but obviously you can peruse as much as you want, okay? So one of the things the document does is it tells you, first of all, what is the character of a church of this size? Now, I know that we're a little bit less than this. I don't know exactly how much less, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. This category really is from 40 to 200. Okay, so 40 to 200 is exactly where we are, which means these are the characteristics. So characteristically speaking, if you were to do a diagnostic on our church as an organization, what are some things that are true about this organization? Well, we're going to find those out in this character section, all right? And I have found these to be very true, but what I want you to do is I want you to read through these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, these different 8 characteristics, and I want you to think about which of these are really true about our church, which are not true, and which do you don't know about, maybe you haven't thought about before, okay? But yeah, that's all I want to say. So kind of just peruse through this a little bit and see if this just kind of describes where we are. Now, here's where I want to focus our time on in the next couple minutes, and that's this. Well, how does it grow? How does an organization like this grow? Now, let me also say this is by way of precursor. No pun intended, because my cursor's right there. No pun intended. Let me say this first. I'm sorry. Each category of church doesn't necessarily have to go to the next category. So growth is not only a numerical exploration. Yes, organizations that are healthy grow, and oftentimes numbers are a metric of that. However, what this document is not trying to do is it's not telling you must go to the next level. It's not saying that. So it's not saying to the house church, you must become a small church. It's not saying to the small church, you must become a medium-sized church. No. What the document is doing is it's saying, hey, who are you as a church? Where are you at? And then secondly, how can you be most faithful where you are, with the hopes that as you become healthy, you do begin to grow as well. But now let's say, for instance, like we're looking at this size category and we're like, you know what? This is exactly where God wants us to be. This is who we are. We're reaching people that God's called us to reach. We're being faithful. And guess what? Then this is still a helpful document because it helps us work through some of the areas in which we need to be efficient in as an organization. But at the same time, we don't have to go to the next range, which I think is 200 to 450, somewhere in there. So adding about 200 people. We don't have to add that many people. However, if we want to add that many people, or if we just want to get really healthy, and as a result, we're going to add people, then it is really helpful to kind of look through and see, okay, how do we do that? How do we break through these thresholds in a way that's healthy for everyone involved. Okay, so that's my precursor to this as well. So if we are wanting to grow, there are a couple things in which this document says are absolutely non-negotiables. Okay, he doesn't weight these in particular, like so, or he doesn't. This is not necessarily a linear box checking type situation, but there are boxes to check. There are areas to shore up. And they can be tackled in whatever order. However, I do think there is a logical kind of flow to these various options. So if you notice that the first change, well, I'm sorry. Let me show you this first. Because if you look at the character of this first line, there are lots of things that the small church and the house church share in common. But the biggest thing that we share in common actually is above this, is right here. The biggest thing we share in common is going to be this right here. I can't find it now. Here we go. I'm sorry. It's in the how it grows section. Here's what we share in common with the house church that is absolutely important, is this. Like house churches, small churches grow through newcomer attraction to the relationships in the congregation. This word right here is worth all the gold that you can find in Mississippi, okay? The way in which we grow is through relationships. I'm going to go ahead and say it like this again. You've heard me say this before, but we are going to grow by leveraging our relationships inside and outside of this church. That's how we grow. We can have the greatest building in the world. We can have the most resources, but because of our size dynamic, people that we're going to be able to attract are looking for relationships first and foremost. So you can have the nicest building in the world. You can have the greatest kids building in the world. You can have all the resources, but if your primary focus is not on building relationships, oh man, we're going to have a really, really, really tough time. We're going to spin our wheels in directions that we're not meaning to because we're ignoring this part. So I bring that to your attention because all of these threshold recommendations are going to flow from this idea of relationships. Okay. Now the relationships can be in relation to the congregation. They can also be in relationship to me, the pastor. That's one of the superpowers I have at our size congregation, is that a lot of growth, immediate growth, can be done by exhausting one resource, me, which is exciting and good. At the same time, it also can be a double-edged sword because, again, a lot of that hinges on me, okay? And we'll talk through this ad nauseum in time, but just so you know. So we're looking for relationships to the congregation, to the pastor. All right, and there's a couple different ways you can do that, but here's what the recommendation is here, or the example. Pastor, for instance, can start 2 or 3 new ministries or groups as long as he secured the backing of one key informal leader. Now, this key informal leader part is a hangover, not in a bad way, but it's hung over from the house church. Because in a house church, it's really not about position or title. It's not about any kind of ranking system other than who's been there the longest, whose house do you meet in, who has the loudest voice. So things of that nature weigh a lot more in a smaller community than they do like in a larger corporation type community. Okay, so the pastor has this ability to attract new people. However, the check and balances, he's got to have participation from the key leaders in the room. Okay. So that's really, really important. But notice we're still doubling down on what? Relationships. Absolutely, we're doubling down on the relationships. So here's how it plays out with these threshold barriers. So notice the first change that has to occur, like this is not a recommendation, this is like this has to happen, is there has to be multiple options. Multiple options for what, you ask? Well, the sky's the limit and we can get creative as we want, but the first thing we're looking for is to multiply. If I had to add a word here, I would say options, well, maybe multiple words. I would say first change is going to be multiplying options where we already have things working. So for instance, if you look down here, uh, two services will immediately draw more people than one service did. Okay. Now that can feel overwhelming to add a different service, but if you think about it from a resource perspective, it's really not that much stuff. You have this. You can start off. Well, we can talk about that later, but you can make this pretty simple. You basically make a carbon copy of what you're already doing. So that would be an example of multiplying what we're already doing in a way to gain some new traction with some new folks, right? So you can also do that with Sunday school electives. So right now, I think we offer 2 classes. What if we offered 4? You know, and the idea behind it is this: because when you give people more options, they typically opt. They make the choices. So the first thing is multiplication. The second thing, I'm going to go through a little bit quicker through these because I assume my time is long already. Second is this: is the willingness to pay the cost of additional primary ministry or staff person. You can read about all this here. I think it's a wonderful argument. Here's what I'm going to argue forever, for the rest of our lives together. People are always a more worthy investment than property. Now, I'm not saying if something's broke, you don't fix it. But what I am saying is if there's the option to hire someone to work on staff or to work as an intern or to work as like a consultant, leader or something like that, I have found those to be infinitely more valuable at churches our size than adding, adding something to the building, right? Or again, I'm not saying things that are broken. So I'm not saying if the AC breaks, you ignore that and you go hire an intern. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying for the cosmetic upgrade stuff versus hiring a ministry staff person, the ministry staff person is always a better option. Or I would say most of the time is a better option. So for instance, we're talking about the room and the price of it, $3,000. Well, without getting into it too much, because we're going to talk about this, and I am fully in support of the decision of the session when it comes to the room. I was not here when we started those conversations, and it is my role to be a part of the collective wisdom of the room. Remember, when we are gathered in the room as a session, the smartest person in the room is the room. So we do well to listen to one another, whether we agree or disagree. But just for sake of argument and to bring home this point that I think is being made here in the second change. So $3,000 to upgrade a kid's room where kids are going to spend an hour a week, maybe a little bit more. Let's say 5 hours a week, so $3,000. Well, with that same $3,000, we could also hire 2 pastoral interns for the whole summer. And those pastoral interns will work 20 hours a week, 15 to 20 hours a week, and they will be doing the things both internally helping, but then also externally. So they're engaged in the community, they're doing ministry here at home, and we're paying half the price. So in my estimation, it's always at least wise to look at how much manpower or woman power will this buy me versus just buying me a new cosmetic space, okay? So again, it's just something to think about, just something there. I think it's really important. The third change, if you notice, is they're willing to let power shift away from laity and even the lay leaders to the staff. This is a big one, and this is one that I know is coming, and it is important, but it is really important also how we do this. I'll just, in passing, I'll mention, since this is a closed video, no one seeing this who doesn't need to see it. I think this is something that Stan tried to implement quickly. And I think his logic was sound and helpful, but there's a lot that's got to go into this before you can start taking power away from people that are used to having power. And I'm aware of that, and you're all aware of that, and it also, we all need to be aware this is something that eventually has to change, and we have to be in favor of it. Fourth change, it's a willingness to become more formal and deliberate in assimilation and communication. Very important. Communication piece, absolutely vital. People have got to know where they can find out what they need to know. And the assimilation piece, even more. You can have, again, I'm going to go back to the building and facilities piece. You can have the nicest building and facilities in the world. But if visitors don't know what to do when they come visit you, it doesn't matter. If people don't feel loved and cherished when they come visit you, it doesn't matter. So the assimilation, going from new visitor through the door to active participant in the life of the congregation, those processes have got to be thought through, and we have to have something that works really well for us way before we start opening up, saying, hey, come be a part of what we're doing. People need to know how they can actually do that. So those processes have to be looked at again, right? The fifth change, it's the ability and willingness of both pastor and the people for the pastor to do shepherding a bit less and leading a bit more. Now, we are not here yet. However, so this line item, this agenda item of updating you guys kind of on behind the scenes, the Wizard of Oz, or I don't know, talking about vision, those kinds of things. This is my attempt to slowly move towards this fifth change. It's taking. Here's the deal. At the end of the day, in order for future progression to be had, we've got to have someone thinking about future progression. And so in every company, in the company that you work for, works the same way. Churches don't work any different. So it's not that the church stops shepherding. It's that the shepherd, the pastor, begins to train other people to shepherd so that he can free himself up to do some of the vision casting as well as shepherding, as we attempt to kind of break through that threshold. This is a painful one, okay? I'll just be honest with you. And this one will probably take the most time, especially based on the history of our church and what people's expectations are. But this is a significant one, okay? And then lastly, and I do want to underline the word lastly. Lastly, the sixth change, considering the option of moving to a new space and facilities. Now, what I want you to notice is this, and this is very important, and it's this. There's a reason why this is prescribed as the last change, and it's because it's going to have the most minimal impact on your long-term evangelism outreach strategy and growth strategy. Your new space and new facilities is something that has got to be, a cosmetically pleasing space outfitted the way that you want it to be outfitted is a wonderful thing, and it's a beautiful thing. However, it is the sixth thing in a list of six things. It's the last thing. It brings the little amount of it brings the little amount of change, because ultimately, why? Because remember, we are all about gaining momentum through relationships. We can grow to 400, 500 people with the ugliest building in the world if we're a church that prioritizes relationships, if we trust each other, if we're looking for each other's good, if we're looking for how we can serve the community well, if we're multiplying things, if we're communicating, over communicating, if we have good systems, if we're involving other people, staff and lay leader wise, if we're shifting the power from lay leaders to a smaller group to where we can move faster. See, if we're doing this is where all the work is happening. And I say it like that because a lot of times churches, myself included, as a pastor for over 20 years now, we tend to think as this is the most important one. And I think that's why he provocatively kind of says, will such a move be crucial to breaking the next growth barrier? And the answer is sometimes, but not usually. Usually it's multiplying or breaking. I like to say breaking. It's getting every bang for your buck where you are before trying to move on. Now, again, this is considering moving facilities totally, but I would also put remodels into this particular category. Now, again, that is not to say if something is broke, we don't fix it. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is before we put a lot of stress, before we put a lot of expectation into this being the end-all be-all change that we need to realize the experts are telling us for our size church, this is actually going to make the littlest splash. And I think that's really important. Not to say that we don't upgrade things. I'm not saying that. Not to say that we don't vote our conscience on the issue at hand. I'm not saying that. But I do want to put it in perspective of, again, not giving it any more power than it actually has on a community our size. Now, for a community of a different size, it's different. Once you start getting into the thousands and things of that nature where people really are looking for more amenity-based ministry, well, now we're having a different conversation. But for where we're at right now, for where we're wanting to go, crossing these next thresholds is going to be 100% contingent on relationships. I hope this is helpful. We will keep looking through this over and over and over again. It is a very helpful document, if for no other reason than conversations. So, hey, hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you very